So just to recap, at the very bottom here of the page 13, in chapter 13, the author of the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe, finally answers the question that he posed in the first chapter. In the first chapter, the author stated the Talmudic passage about Rabbah, who claimed that he was a Beinoni. Now, as you recall, there are really 5 levels in the categories of righteousness. The highest is a tzaddik that is complete, a righteous man that is complete. Beinoni is only, it's 2 levels lower than that. So his students, particularly Abaya, came to Rabbi and said, well, if you're a Beinoni, which is not the complete tzaddik, not the highest level, but you're 2 levels lower than that, then what are we? We thought you were the tzaddik and that you are the leader. But if you're just a Beinoni and you're really on a much higher level than us, then what does that leave us with? Then we're nothing. Then we're not even wicked. We're worse than that. And the question of the author was, therefore, how could Rabbah consider himself a Beinoni? He was completely righteous. He was the leader of the generation. In fact, the Talmud states that he always studied Torah. In other words, the Torah never left his lips. Lo pasik pumya migirsa. That's exactly the words, that his lips always spoke Torah. That's the level he was at. So how could he consider himself a Beinoni? Was it just false humility? What was it? And now finally, in chapter 13, he answers this question. And the answer is that we have to understand the inner makeshift of the Beinoni. The Beinoni is someone who is in full control of his animal soul. And his animal soul, therefore, really has no power over him. But from time to time, the animal soul can knock at his door, as we said. By the righteous, the animal soul doesn't even knock at his door. Now, there are moments in the life of the Beinoni where he is so connected with God, and these are the moments of prayer, as we said, the Shema and the Amidah, where he feels like a completely righteous person, because then the animal soul doesn't even think of knocking at his door. And we developed this idea in the past 2 or 3 weeks. But because of those moments, Rabbah thought that he may be a Beinoni. Yes, he's experiencing his life as a completely righteous person, but maybe it's just because he's studying Torah all the time. Maybe it's just because he's at those lofty moments. But if he stops studying Torah, maybe he'll revert to the Beinoni level where the animal soul can knock at his door. And therefore, he considered himself a Beinoni, thinking that maybe the feelings that he had of being a tzaddik was just the feelings that a Beinoni has when he studies Torah, when he learns, when he prays the Shema, when he engages in a mitzvah, where he feels completely aligned and completely wholesome. So that's the answer that the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, gives to the statement of Rabbah that he was a Beinoni. But basically, Rabbah did make a mistake. He was a completely righteous person. Anyway, all of this, of course, is to explain the state of the Beinoni. Again, I'm just going to summarize this very quickly and I will continue. To be in the state of the Beinoni is that he's constantly in full control of his animal soul, even though the animal soul might creep into his thoughts and knock at his door, but he doesn't allow him in. And the Beinoni, part 2, also has moments in which he feels like a complete wholesome tzaddik. When he engages in mitzvah, when he prays the Shema, when he studies Torah, those are moments of complete spiritual awakening and alignment that there's no room even for the animal soul to even come close and knock at his door. So we use the example of Rabbah, or the statement of Rabbah at least, to better understand the Beinoni. Let's continue here at the bottom of page 13, like you said, Margot, please.
Should I read?
Yes, why not? Unless there's anyone else.
Okay.
Okay, go for it.
With this reason, Rabbah considered himself as though he were a Beinoni. The author returns here to an additional question he asked in the first chapter. To explain what a Beinoni is, Rabbah says, I, for example, am a Beinoni. And the question was, how could someone of Rabbah's stature be described as a Beinoni?
Right.
So his mouth never ceased from study. He never interrupted his Torah study. His entire life consisted exclusively of Torah and the commandments. If even the angel of death had no power over him, how could he consider himself an intermediate man? Clearly, this was not false humility, something equal to or worse than pride. The Hasidim say regarding pride that one at least knows it is unacceptable. With false humility, though, not only does one find himself faultless, he also deludes himself that he is performing a commandment.
Right. I just want to focus, even though I'm not trying to deviate here, but one of the great traps of the animal soul is false humility. I'm sure you've met people like that they say, no, I'm nothing, I'm humble, and this and that, but it's really to promote themselves even more as humble. People are humble, don't have to claim to the whole world that they're humble. They're claiming to the whole world that they're humble. That means that they're not humble because they're using that false humility just to project themselves even more. So that's the false humility. And there's a great Hasidic quote that says that when it comes to tricks like this, that the animal soul plays on us, that people play on themselves, then we ought to remember the Hasidic quote that says that God is watching over us all the time. He knows our innermost, and therefore it's impossible to fool God. To fool human beings around you is pretty hard. The only person you can truly fool is yourself. But what's the big chokhmah? What's the big wisdom? To fool a fool? That's the Hasidic quote. Fooling yourself, right? But false humility sometimes fools yourself. You fool yourself into thinking that you're humble. While and therefore Hasidim really stayed far, far, far away from that curse that of false humility. So Rabbah, who's certainly a righteous person, didn't have here false humility. He just, again, it's very hard to decipher, and he maybe he had like this analytical challenge, because it's very hard to decipher between the state of the Beinoni when he studies Torah, again, which is a state of complete alignment, and the state of the tzaddik, that is always completely aligned. And that was the mistake that Rabbah made. But certainly he wasn't engaging in false humility. Hasidim would also say, just about false humility, to continue a little bit more, that false humility is worse than arrogance, even though it's a type of arrogance, but it's worse than clear arrogance. But because when you're arrogant, at least you know that you're being arrogant. Yeah. When you're engaging in false humility, you're fooling yourself that you're being humble. So not only are you being arrogant through false humility, but you're also living in a lie. When you're arrogant, you're not living in a lie, because at least you know you're arrogant. So it's even worse. It's the worst type of arrogance. Yeah. So what is the difference then between false humility and truthful humility? It's a question that has to be asked since we're speaking about this. And I would say the main difference is that false humility is about you. I'm humble. I'm nothing. That's not what true humility is. True humility is you recognize who you are. You recognize what your gifts are, what your talents are. But as the Lubavitcher Rebbe once put it, you also know that if those gifts and talents were given to someone else, that someone else would do a much better job with them than you. That's true humility. And in many ways, I think that's why Moshe was called the most humble person on earth. Moshe knew who he was. He knew he was the leader of the Jewish people chosen by God himself at the burning bush. We saw that just in last week's, or in a week and a half ago, a day ago, Parsha, Korach, where there's a rebellion that's staged against his leadership. Moshe stands up for himself, but he doesn't stand up for himself, meaning his ego. Stands up for himself, his gift given to him by God, gift that God wanted him to use, gift of leadership. So he knew who he was. But at the same time, he remained humble because he always knew that he wasn't at the stage where, that's it, he reached perfection. Someone else could always do a better job with those gifts than he could. Anyway, that's the difference. Just to draw the line between false humility and true humility. False humility is about you, your ego, how great you are, but really the mask of false humility. True humility is not about you. It's about what God gave you. And you trying to do a good job, even though you know that others could do a better job with those same gifts. Okay. Let's continue. Please, again, please speak your minds. This shouldn't be a monologue, so please speak your mind.
Okay.
Let's continue just a little bit more.
It makes me,
yes,
it makes
please.
me think of wealthy people who behave like schnorrers.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm laughing because there's a joke about that, but we're not going to go into it. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
In
let's
Keter
continue.
Shem Tov, in Keter Shem Tov, the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, explains the verse, and his concubine, whose name is Ruyuma, to describe corrupted humility, of which a person is proud, and that he wishes to display to others. The term Ma signifies self-nullification, true humility, as is in Moses' words, and Ma, what are we?
Right.
Ruyuma is humility designed for show. Ryu, see that I am Ma, nothing. This is a false humility, a humility of klipa, husk or shell.
Right. And by the way, that's just to explain the source here. Ufilaksho Shmago Uman, his concubine, and her name was Reuma, really speaks of Betuel. Betuel, who was the father of Rebecca, Rivka, one of the matriarchs, the wife of Isaac, the mother of Jacob and Esau. But her father, Betuel, had a concubine. And his concubine's name was Reuma. Now, the Hasidic masters explain this name in a beautiful way to really encapsulate what false humility is all about. Re'uma in Hebrew is really a combination of two words. Re'u, as he explains here, Re'u, ma, see, nothing. False humility is when people come to you and say, hey, look at me, I'm nothing. Look at me. It's always about them. Look at me, I'm nothing. Hey, you should admire my nothingness, my humility, because I'm nothing. But I'm humble, and it's the best quality to have. So worship me. Look, I'm nothing. Re'u ma. Now, when you're a re'u ma, you're on the same level as the Hasidic saying here is applying. You're at the same level as a concubine. That sums up your life, more or less. And that's the danger of false humility. By the way, I think that just to reverse the thought a little bit, you see it in people. I'm sure you do. The difference between people who have false humility or true humility. And the eye-opening moment is when you meet people with false humility, you realize that it's really only about them. When you meet people with true humility, you realize that it's about God channeled through them. It's not about them. God channeled through them. And they are therefore drawing you into God, not into their ma, re'uma, their nothingness, or themselves. They're drawing you into God. That's how you can tell, and it's well described here through this word re'uma. Now, Rabbah, of course, is just again speaking about Rabbah. Rabbah wasn't engaging in false humility; he was completely righteous. He again was not able to distinct between the highest moment of a Benoni and a tzaddik, as we explained. Another good definition that I like about humility, true humility, is what Winston Churchill would say, that humility is not thinking less about yourself, it's thinking about yourself less. So it's not beating yourself down, not saying, oh, I'm nothing. because God actually wanted you to contribute to the place of the world that you're in, the society altogether, to make the world a better place. If you're nothing, you can't contribute. Sand is nothing. Soil is not, dust is nothing, but dust doesn't contribute much. Rocks are maybe nothing, but they don't contribute much. So if you're nothing, you really can't fulfill the reason for which you were created. God wants you to contribute, so you have to be something. So you can't put yourself down. You can't think less of yourself. So what is humility? Humility is knowing yourself, but always putting the other first. It's not about you. It's thinking about yourself less. In many ways, I think, if we want to broaden the conversation a little bit, since we're speaking about humility, I think that this is in many ways the plague of our society, if I may say, that many of us are just engaged in me and my feelings and myself and my state of life and my surroundings, my diseases, and it's always about me. In fact, every year in December of the year, so past time this was published was in December of 2023, there's a study that is published that speaks about the most spoken words in America. And almost every year, consistently, the words like I, me, myself are among the top 20. And it's fascinating because it shows how I-oriented we are. Jokingly, we've said this in the past, it's fascinating to note that the catchy names given to the most famous gadgets have an I, like the iPhone, the iPad. Even the Wii that kids play with is not spelled W-E. You know how it's spelled? Ask your kids or your grandkids, you'll know. It's spelled W-E-I-I, 2 I's. So, as if finally we have a Wii, but no, you gotta insert 2 I's. That's the society we're in. I. And in many ways, that stops us really from not just being humble, truly humble, but also from being, again, those contributing forces to society. Because if you're a contributing force, you're not about I, you're about you, you're about the real we, without the 2 I's. And I think that, last week was the yahrzeit of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, but I think that was his general approach. That whenever people suffered from maybe even legitimate negative feelings, or even worse than that, his constant approach was go do something for someone else. Because when you do something for someone else, then you're not focused on the I. And when you're not focused on the I, you can finally begin to fulfill the purpose for which you were created, which is not about you, it's about the others. And the soul then responds to that, because the soul wants to be other-focused, not I-focused. It's the body that wants to be I-focused. So the soul responds to that and then becomes really joyful from within. One of the great stories, I'll just share this story very quickly, one of the great stories I shared last week to a group from Las Vegas. But a story about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, I don't know if I've ever shared it, about a man by the name of Meshulam Weiss, who I had the privilege of meeting maybe a decade ago in Los Angeles. I don't know, Gary, do you know the name Meshulam Weiss? No, okay. Meshulam Weiss tells the story of how, he told me the story of how when just before he got married, him and his wife went to the Lubavitcher Rebbe to ask for a blessing. This was on a Thursday night. Wedding was on a Sunday. Usually you don't see the couple. There's a custom where you don't see each other before the wedding, but it was that to go and see the Rebbe together. They saw each other just for that night. And they go into the Rebbe, and shortly, a few minutes into the meeting, his wife-to-be tells Meshulam, do you mind leaving the room? I have to share something with the Rebbe privately. Fine. He's shocked, but he leaves the room. After about 20 minutes, he's called back. The Rebbe gives them a blessing for happy marriage and so on, and they leave and have to part ways until the wedding on Sunday night. The wedding happens on Sunday night, and a few moments after the wedding, Meshulam tells his wife, tell me, why do you kick me out of the room? What happened there? And his wife says, I'll be honest with you, I wanted to cancel the wedding.
Yeah.
So why do you want to cancel the wedding? She says, because I have a very bad temper.
Yeah.
And I knew that this would ruin our marriage. So I told the Rebbe, I want to cancel the wedding because I have a very bad temper and it's going to ruin my marriage. And the Rebbe smiled and he said, don't cancel the wedding. The way to deal with your temper is to go and visit the sick regularly, at least once a week. And then you'll have children, a lot of children. And children will teach you patience. So you'll be fine. And Meshulam tells me the story, and he says, now fast forward 40 years, my wife is past menopause, and she goes to her OBGYN, but it's a new one, someone that she's never met. And he looks at her ultrasound results, and he sees that she has an infertile womb. So he says to her, I see you're a religious woman. I'm sorry, because I know a religious woman like to have many children. You probably didn't have any children at all. Now, by the way, Meshulam and his wife, at that point, had 17 children.
Yeah.
So she decided not to respond. She went home. She told Meshulam, hey, you know what happened? The doctor saw an infertile womb, but we have 17 children.
Mhm.
And they had a good laugh. And then Meshulam says to his wife, you see, that was the advice of the Rebbe. It wasn't just an advice, it was a blessing. When the Rebbe said, you'll have many children that will teach you patience, he also gave you a blessing to have many children.
Mm.
So therefore, even though you may have an infantile womb, you have many children. But the genius also of this exchange is that the Rebbe was telling Meshulam's wife, listen, be other-oriented. You'll have children, go visit the sick. And eventually, your anger, which is very me-focused, anger is always about me. I'm angry. It shouldn't happen to me. That will fade away. And that's what true humility is, thinking about yourself less, not less about yourself, self less. As opposed to false humility, where it's always about me, 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 me. But if any one of us, not God forbid, no one does, but if anyone knows of someone who suffers from this, then go and visit the sick, be other-oriented. That helps a lot.